I have felt the shockwave from 2 bombs that went off. I do remember that vividly. It's things like that when you see people with big shards of glass sticking into their bodies and out of their bodies from a bakery window getting blown out with a bomb, and mowing down people on the street in a holiday town. You don't forget that. And having a head-on collision like that, and for me to be able to come out of that and walk and have legs and only a completely shattered left elbow. And then my mother and my brother were in the car with me, and to somehow have the strength to pull open the sliding door to get my mother out of the car. It was very clear to me then that the only way I survived was that God had his hands around me and that I had a purpose in life at some point. And she said, right now, you 3 guys, the president, the secretary, me, and the British Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary are the only ones who know about this. So you need to plan this with the utmost secrecy and not tell anybody who doesn't absolutely need to know. He takes a look at my carotid artery, and he walks in and he says, what are you doing next week? Because you're about to have a stroke. Your carotid artery is 90% blocked. That was probably the toughest week of my life. I don't know how many people have actually sat down with their spouse and their kids and talked about, if I don't come out of this, and if his plan is for me to not make it, that's the plan. I've been able to tell this story I don't know how many times, and most definitely woven into it in bright orange yarn is that this only happened with God's grace. This was all God's doing, that I'm able to tell this story.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into another episode of Faith in the Line of Duty. Today I have the honor of introducing Lense. He's a good friend of mine. He spent 24 years in the Air Force. We're just going to talk about his story and how God showed up in his life. So just glad that you're here today.
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, just to get to know you, can you tell us a little bit about what your childhood was like?
Yeah, so my childhood's very interesting, a very complex story, I guess. As you can tell, I got a little bit of an accent. It's not a Southern Maryland accent. It's way down south. My mother was born in Namibia, what's now known as Namibia. Back then it was Southwest Africa, former German colony down in Southern Africa, right above South Africa. In a roundabout way, my dad, who was living in Chicago, and her became pen pals when they were, I think she was 17 or 18. I guess she wrote some good letters. He went out to meet her. They decided to get married. She moved over to Chicago with him from Namibia, which as a 18-year-old, I think she was, 19-year-old, was no doubt a huge jump.
For sure, yeah.
I came along a few years later, and then when I was about 4, things were not working out, so my mom took me back to Southwest Africa at the time. And their parents got divorced, and I then grew up in Namibia. For the first few years, my dad would come out to visit me when I was too young to travel. But then as I got older, got into middle school, high school, I would come over to the U.S. for summers or winters, 5-6 weeks at a time, spend time with my dad. So during that time, spent a lot of time on South African Airways and Lufthansa, and 747s crossing the ocean, just sitting in the cockpit back when we could just ask, can I go in the cockpit? And the flight attendants would take me up there, and I would just sit in the cockpit, usually at night over the Atlantic, just looking at all the lights and just soaking it all in. So that's kind of where I developed my interest in flying, I guess. So finished school in Namibia, came over to the U.S., went to and started college. So childhood, as far as faith goes, We attended church. I did Sunday school every Sunday in a Methodist church, I believe it was. Knew about God, knew about Jesus, knew about the Bible, but it really wasn't a functioning part of my childhood. One scar I do have is every Christmas when we were little, my grandparents used to make my two cousins and I sing Christmas carols, a cappella to them, and I hate singing in publicly. Like, I just do not do it. And most people around me don't enjoy when I sing either. But I still remember having to sing Christmas carols as a kid, and I just hated doing it. But I think I got through it eventually.
What would you say was your the thing that you remember most about your childhood?
Definitely the travel was exciting. Good and bad, because I do remember all my friends in school being so jealous that I was getting to go over to America. And like, oh, I want to come with you in your suitcase. If I'd $1 for every time I'd heard that. But it was also not great leaving my friends and family every school holiday and every Christmas eventually. And even though what I came to with my dad's family in America, that was enjoyable and very fun and great experiences in life. So I do remember the travel a lot. Obviously, back then, growing up, there were no, I think we got first video games were the console machines when I was like a junior or senior in high school. Prior to that, there was nothing. We didn't even get TV in Namibia until I was in 8th grade. So we spent all our time outside, playing a lot of sport, tennis, soccer, a lot of cricket.
If we could only go back to that.
Yeah, that was great. Just, you would naturally be outside. And when the weather wasn't great, I read a lot and built airplane models. And yeah, so good childhood overall. Just great experiences traveling, really. And I was blessed in that aspect. That I have come to learn that the fact that my father always loved me, even though it was from a distance, didn't mean anything to me as a young kid. But I have seen the importance of having a father that loves their son is so important.
Huge.
It is massive. Because the absence of that, I've seen numerous cases of where it causes problems as people get older. So very blessed in that aspect.
That's very unique childhood.
Yeah, definitely very unique. And then once I got over to the university at Southern Illinois University, go Salukis. Because when I was growing up in Namibia, there had been an independence war going on between Marxist and communist-led and inspired guerrillas operating out of Angola and in Southwest Africa to liberate Southwest Africa from South Africa. It was a no-kidding war, a bush war, terrorist war. Quite a few memories of that. There was, my grandparents lived in this house right along a railroad line, and we'd see trains going up and down because we spent quite a bit of time at their house. We'd see these trains going past with a whole trainload of tanks and armored vehicles, and they would go up north to the border, and then there'd be an invasion. South African forces would invade Angola, clean out the terrorist camps, and then we'd see all the stuff coming back a few weeks later, a few months later. So big military presence in Namibia during that time. I have felt the shockwave from 2 bombs that went off when I was a kid. I'd never forget that.
How old were you?
The first one, I was probably 9 or 10, and then the second one, probably 12 or 13. I do remember that vividly. It's things like that when you see people with big shards of glass sticking into their bodies and out of their bodies from a bakery window getting blown out with a bomb and mowing down people on the street in a holiday town, you don't forget that. So, yeah, there was this war going on, so we had mandatory junior ROTC. I was in the drum and bugle corps. And then when I came over to college, I saw these Air Force guys sitting in uniform at a table at the college day thing I went to when I was signing up for classes at Southern Illinois, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Let me check that out. So I got into ROTC, and it just kind of grabbed a hold of me, and I thought, yeah, being a military engineer would be a good career to start out with. Then they offered me a pilot slot, and kind of the rest, they say, is history. So I graduated with the pilot slot, passed my flight screening, and went to pilot training in 91 and graduated in 92.
So did that travel from, South Africa to the States, did that kind of make you want to become a pilot?
I wouldn't say so. When I started college, I wanted to be an engineer. I was always good at math and good student. And I just thought, well, I'm going to be an engineer. So I got my degrees in mechanical engineering, of which I've dumped just about everything. But when I've always been interested in planes, and when they offered me a pilot slot, I thought, yeah, sure, why not? And in hindsight, there's a lot of people who just climb over all kinds of obstacles to try to get a pilot slot. Mine was kind of handed to me. I was very fortunate in that aspect because the Manning pendulum in the Air Force, as you know, swings wildly side to side, and 3 years later, who knows, 5 years later, there probably were no ROTC pilot slots, and then 2 years later, you couldn't not get one. So maybe good timing.
I'm feeling that right now, just with being the third time, trying to get an OTS slot. So hopefully we might find out next month. So
good.
Yeah, we might find out.
Yeah.
So
well, the right thing will happen.
Yeah. So do you remember the first time you went solo?
Yeah. It's interesting that when and I don't know how this has happened in your life and in your development as a professional in your field, but I remember the name of the instructor I had at Embry-Riddle. So I did ROTC summer camp at Laughlin Air Force Base back when it was a hard place to go to before the Air Force got all gentle and friendly. And we got screamed at something crazy, and we had to run incredibly, in incredible heat in San Antonio, Texas in July. But thankfully, I was able to get to the flight screening program the Air Force had in Daytona Beach, Florida. So that was nice. And we got our, 15 hours or so of Cessna 152 time that the Air Force had contracted with Embry-Riddle. And I still remember the instructor I had at Embry-Riddle. His last name was Twomey, Twomey. Just, you remember instructors in your life that made an impression on you, that helped you get through something important. So, the solo in that program was you do your training, you do your ground school, you do your flight training, and after about 10 or 11 hours flying, you go in for your solo day and you take off and you fly around the flagpole and you land, and the instructor gets out and he says, all right, if you're going to crash, don't crash on a car or crash in your house, crash in the ocean. So off I went, took off out of Daytona, flew around the flagpole, landed again, and got my wings. And that was it. I passed the flight screening.
So, were you nervous? I'm sure I would have been really nervous.
Yeah, I guess I've been blessed with an ability to focus, which is probably good for pilots to have. And that I don't ever think that, man, there I was, and I was flying and I was nervous, or I was really worried about this or that. I just have the ability, I guess, to focus and just look at the task at hand and do what I need to do and do the job. And when it's over, look to the next thing. So I don't I'm sure my heart was beating fast at the time. And I guess I've actually recently started wearing an iWatch. Resisted for a long time, but I just came off a spell of disability, and the first time I landed the plane after going through retraining again, I went and I looked at my heartbeat for that day, and I could very clearly see where my heart rate increased for takeoff and landing. So I'm sure I get amped up and my focus goes up and my heart rate goes up when things get busy, but I don't ever, as far as I know, think, wow, I'm really nervous now, and I hope this works out. Just do it.
That's good. That's what you want in a pilot.
Yeah, I would think so. Pilots, surgeons.
Right.
There's probably a few people like that you want to have that kind of mindset, I guess.
Yeah. Did you guys have drop nights whenever you got assigned your first pilot? Did you all do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was your first?
So when I came out of pilot training, I started pilot training and we had this was right after the Gulf War. So classes were huge, and then the war ended and classes shrank drastically. So we had a very small pilot training class. And that was also during the time when they were handing out banked assignments, only about half the class or so would actually get a plane out of pilot training. The other half would end up with a desk job, maintenance, Intel or something for 2 to 3 years, or until the pendulum swung and the Air Force realized, we don't have any pilots. We need pilots. So I ended up with a C-12 out of pilot training, which I was very happy to get a plane. There were no fighters at all at the time. I'd always wanted to fly A-10s, but that didn't happen because there were no fighters that were available for anybody, even the top graduates. There just weren't any. Again, funny how the pendulum swings. Getting a KC-135 during the time when they were handing out banked assignments was great. Everyone was happy with it. 5 years prior, the mindset was, oh, you're going to fly a tanker. 10 years later, it was like, oh, you're going to fly a tanker. So it all depends where you are at the time. So I ended up with a C-12 and then to Wright-Patterson. And then, it was probably a couple of months after pilot training. I was still in Lubbock, coming back from the White River Reservoir, where I'd been skiing with some former instructors and friends, water skiing, and had a head-on collision on the back roads, 60 miles an hour. Came over a hill, and a teenage guy had dropped his soda in his truck, and he leaned over to pick up his soda, and we smashed into him at 50, 60 miles an hour head on. So we'll get to that moment and what that meant in my life, but I was pretty seriously injured. Took me about 1.5 years to get back on flight status, by which time the C-12s had been retired. So I was forced to take a C-21 Learjet instead, which I was like, okay, nice little, an awesome downgrade from what I had. So first jet I flew out of pilot training was then the Learjet.
That's cool. And then what aircraft did you move to after that?
So after 3 years or so in that, moved to the C-5 and flew that for 3 years out at Travis Air Force Base.
Huge plane.
Very big.
Yeah.
I remember my first landing in the plane. During the briefing, the pre-brief, the instructor says, what plane are you coming from? I said, C-21, and he's like, oh. So the C-21 cockpit, Learjet cockpit, is like 5 feet off the ground.
Wow.
The C-5 cockpit is probably 30 feet off the ground, 30 to 40 feet off the ground, if not more. So he said to me, when we're coming in for your landing, you need to think about landing like an hour before you're going to land, because you're used to being so close to the ground. Now you're so high above the ground, but the wheels are not.
Right.
And sure enough, my first landing just absolutely slammed it on, because I was not ready for the ground yet.
Right.
I still thought I had quite a while to fly before we landed, but
yeah, that's a huge aircraft. I remember the first time I was in that. I was going from Turkey, and then we went all the way to Maine, and yeah, it was weird because in the top, I was in that the chairs up top, but they were facing the opposite direction of where you normally would. So taking off, and you're like, you have to be strapped in, obviously, but you're just taking off. You feel like you're going to fall out of your seat.
Yeah,
the thrust on that aircraft is crazy.
It is, but it's not really a racehorse. It wasn't then with the old engines it used to have. It flew really well and was very spritey if you didn't have any cargo and not a lot of gas. Mm-hmm. But when you loaded that thing up with a lot of cargo and pallets of whatever, and boats and tanks and helicopters, whatever we used to carry, and then you loaded it up with gas, it was quite the beast. As far, it was a mule.
Yeah,
it was not a racehorse.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, good assignment. A lot of interesting travel. A lot of cool experiences. A lot of interesting personnel experiences. Working with a crew of 18 to 20 people, flying all around the world. In a plane that had a lot of maintenance issues. Mm-hmm. In my 3 years flying the C5, I got home the day I was scheduled to get home twice. Wow. Every other time we either got held up in a deployment somewhere, or we broke and had to wait for maintenance or an engine to be changed, whatever. Not always a bad thing if you broke somewhere nice. You're staying in a 5-star hotel on the beach, and you got to wait there for a week for a new engine to arrive.
Oh, darn. Yeah.
It's a good thing I'm strong. I made it.
Right.
But yeah, it was a tough family assignment. That's for sure.
Yeah. So how was your relationship with Jesus like, going through this time in your career?
Yeah, during that time, we went to church. When my boys came along, I read them Bible stories every night. We'd read the children's Bible, so they know about God, they know about Jesus. But it really wasn't part of my conscious being day to day, hour to hour. And my faith didn't govern how I acted and spoke and the people I hung out with. It was, I would do what everyone else did, and then also go to church on Sundays when some of them didn't go to church. But it really wasn't a significant part in my life to where, other than trying to be a good person and sometimes trying to be patient, it was part of my upbringing and my background, but it wasn't really part of how I tried to live and who I was day to day. It wasn't a primary part of my being, and I certainly didn't think that my number one job on this planet is to make disciples for God, and to be a representative of Jesus in every way I can, and to try to attract people to salvation.
Was there any moments where you just saw the Lord like clearly show up, even though you weren't really on that path?
Yeah, the car accident I mentioned was certainly a moment where, if you see a picture of the van I was driving, this big solid metal van, and having a head-on collision like that, and for me to be able to come out of that and walk and have legs and only a completely shattered left elbow. And then my mother and my brother were in the car with me, and to somehow have the strength to pull open the sliding door to get my mother out of the car. it was very clear to me then that the only way I survived was that God had his hands around me and that I had a purpose in life at some point. And I used to say that a lot, but I didn't really live it from that day forward. But yeah, that would be the story. As when I show people pictures, I'd say, well, as you can see, the only reason I'm alive is because God has a purpose for me. It was not my time to go yet, because you would, bet all your lifetime earnings that the driver of that car did not make it out, because it was absolutely smashed up.
Man, God showed up.
Yeah.
I'm glad he did.
So that was one time. That was probably the first time. Well, fast forwarding, we've kind of haven't talked about my time at Andrews.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about that a little bit. So
yeah.
What was that like?
It was good. And I do often say that I had an amazing career and I did a lot of really cool things, and I've got weeks and weeks worth of stories, and eventually I'll write a book when I've outlived certain people that I had dealings with. I'll just leave that there. It was an amazing job, and between my time flying at Andrews on 757, as well as in the Pentagon, scheduling all the VIP missions throughout DoD, and being one ring away from Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and frequently having to talk to him about things that were going on in the world of VIP airlift when someone didn't get the right kind of mustard or was upset about some ridiculous issue like a cappuccino machine not being in the plane, and just stuff you cannot make up.
Right.
It was a great job, great experiences, saw things that just blow most people's minds. But I don't miss really any of it. Certainly don't miss PowerPoint training.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, I've moved on to greater things now.
How do you get selected for being like Air Force 2 pilot, right?
For that job, you, at the time, I don't know what it's like now, but you had to be a major weapon system instructor pilot or evaluator pilot. So you needed to have major weapon system, not fighter pilot, because it's all transport, experience. And I think they needed 2,500 hours total at the time, with instructor time and or evaluator time. And then you came out to Andrews for a 2-day interview process, sat in front of a panel of 4 or 5 current SAM, Special Air Missions pilots. And they interviewed you and asked you about your flying career and probably questions to identify who you are as a person, whether you'd be reliable. And I often say I slipped through many cracks in my career, and I slipped through that crack and got hired flying the 757 in the first airlift squadron. When I got into the squadron, I was the only captain in the squadron. I won company grade officer of the year my first 2 years there.
Right. Yeah.
I was also the only company grade officer of the year, but I don't tell everybody that.
Yeah.
But it was a very experienced pilot corps. And so I did 3.5 to 4 years assigned to Andrews. My 4th year there, I got pulled into the Pentagon on loan basis to schedule VIP missions. So being really on the inside of the beast and talking to the White House military office and talking to the State Department and DoD leadership, travel coordinators to actually plan their overseas trips for them and their stateside trips and building the itineraries. And that was a very, very interesting and very challenging job, because you continually putting together a very complex puzzle, and then you'd have the schedule all built, and then 2 of the planes would break, and then you'd have to reshuffle everything, or a more higher priority passenger would come in, and you'd have to take a trip that you'd been working on for 2 weeks, a 10-day overseas trip. And you'd basically say, sorry, you lost your plane to the vice president. And then instead you'd build a DC to Omaha and back, a 1-day trip. And to keep juggling all those requirements and all the planes and trying to keep everybody happy and explaining why, you learn how to communicate effectively.
Right.
Or else. I always say you develop a skill on how to package bad situations and bad news for people. Because if you can package it in a way that it's palatable for them, then it makes the pain less intense for them when they have to then go and tell their boss that they didn't get the plane they thought they had, and tickets on Delta are going to be $3,000 instead. So
yeah, there's got to be a lot of moving pieces there.
Yeah,
all that stuff.
An incredible amount.
Yeah,
more than anybody can imagine, really. Yeah. And I only saw part of them as well.
Yeah. Who all did you get to fly?
So my first flight at the 89th, my first active flight, I don't know if it was my first or not, but I flew Al Gore's last Air Force 2. I was on that from LaGuardia back to DC. Then I flew Dick Cheney, probably more than I flew anybody else during the Bush administration. During that administration, I also flew Condoleezza Rice a lot. Donald Rumsfeld, flew him a lot. Flew quite a few congressional trips at the time with Speaker of the House level people and big congressional delegations. Who else did I fly during the Bush administration? First Lady, a bunch of Laura Bush trips. And then when they left office, flew a lot of Air Force 2s with Joe Biden, flew him for 6 years. Flew, who else? Hillary Clinton, of course, a lot. Got to know them very, very well, and developed some opinions about their operation for sure. And then flew John Kerry. Some of the other interesting people are the former president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai. Flew him a bunch because whenever we brought him over to the United Nations in support of the whole Afghanistan operation, we would fly out there and pick him up and then take him back as well. So flew into Afghanistan quite a few times, usually with him. Flew a bunch of USO trips, which were always interesting, usually a chairman of the Joint Chiefs, accompanying stars like John Elway, Robin Williams.
You were probably a big part of history quite a few times.
Yeah, that was a really rewarding part of the job. Not only flying, but in the Pentagon, where I would see trips being built, and I would be in these, at the time before they happened, classified discussions about things that were brewing. Of course, once the trips went public, a trip to Saudi Arabia or to Kuwait or to Pakistan, it's not secret the minute you have to ask the host country for overflight clearances and landing clearances, because their first question is, who are you carrying? And if you say, I'm not telling you, then they say, well, then you can't come.
Right.
So the classified level stuff always dropped off as soon as we sent out our diplomatic clearance requests. It was really cool to fly a trip and then get back and see it on the news. One of my coolest trips, one of my many cool trips, I should say, was with Condoleezza Rice. I was in the Pentagon at the time, so I actually kind of scheduled this trip, or what I thought was going to be the trip. It was going to be to fly from DC to Manchester, England, sit there for 6 days, and fly back. And being a big Manchester United soccer fan, I worked my way onto that trip. So I was just looking really forward to getting a tour of the soccer stadium and getting to be in Manchester for a few days. Well, halfway across the ocean, a travel coordinator comes up to the cockpit and says, "Hey, I need to talk to you guys." So our initial thought is, okay, what's up? So travel coordinator, good friend, she says, "We're not going to be in Manchester for 5 days. We're going to be there for 1 day, so you can still go get your soccer, visit soccer stadium, visit Al. But then we're going to take the British Foreign Secretary into Kuwait, and he and Condoleezza Rice are going to get on C-17 and fly into Baghdad." This is right after the Gulf War. And she said, "Right now, you three guys, the president, the secretary, me, and the British Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary are the only ones who know about this. So you need to plan this with the utmost secrecy and not tell anybody who doesn't absolutely need to know." That was quite a challenge.
Right.
Long story, but we ended up pulling it off, and we filed a flight plan to Dubai. And then when we got over Kuwait, we told air traffic control, which was American at the time because we just invaded and taken over Iraq, that we need to change our destination and land in Kuwait City. Actually at Al El Salam Air Base. So we spiraled down, we land, and there was a C-17 there waiting for us with 2 lieutenants in it, pilots. All they'd been told is be there, ready to go at whatever time, and you're going to be flying into Baghdad. And here we pull up in our nice shiny blue and white plane, and the Secretary of State and the Foreign Secretary get off, and they walk over and get on the C-17 and fly into Baghdad. And about 20 minutes later, the U.S. ambassador shows up at the airport. And he was furious because he had not been told that this was all happening. And when I realized that he did not know, I said I felt good because that meant we'd achieved our, making it happen with the minimum number of people knowing, if even the ambassador in Kuwait didn't know at the time. So that was rewarding. So getting things like that done was, you kind of give yourself a little pat on the back and you feel like you've accomplished something when you do that.
So at what point did your walk with Jesus change? I know you said it's always been in you.
Yeah.
Where was the change for you?
During my time at Andrews in the Air Force, long days, going to the Pentagon every day, flying 1 week to 10, 11-day trips, and a lot of one-day trips. I was very busy. Struggled to keep the work-family balance healthy. Did spend a lot of time with kids coaching soccer, eventually refereeing soccer, going to marching band events with my oldest at the time, and spent a lot of time with the kids and tried to keep the balance as best I could. But it did take a toll on my marriage. So after 24 years of marriage, ended up getting a divorce. It was not a pleasant agreement, very stressful, and a lot of uncertainty came into me after, for many years, kind of reaching out to God and praying for help to keep going till the kids got to an age where I felt like they could handle it. But it was not easy, very difficult time. My whole world kind of got turned upside down, granted, because I induced a lot of that by finally saying, this is just not working. I've done everything I can, and I don't see a future in this for myself and for the kids. It's just destructive, and I have to try to rebuild. But that was hard, and started attending a church just for some emotional guidance, emotional support, to change my circle, and to look to God for some guidance and help and strength, and comfort during that difficult time. So that's when, I don't know how you would describe it, it became more of a need to have God be more active in my life. Coincidentally, at that time, I had reconnected with Carol, who, going back a number of years to my early childhood in Namibia, was my second grade girlfriend.
Wow.
And I'll have to show you my second grade class photo, which I actually have my yearbook from my second grade yearbook from my school. We'd been Facebook friends for a while, but had never really communicated. And I saw on Facebook that she was in America on business. So I sent her a message and said, hey, we haven't spoken in 30 years. We should catch up. So we chatted, and come to find out that we'd been on these parallel life courses. We're both divorced with kids. And had kind of had similar marriage experiences. And we just kind of rekindled our friendship, and she started sharing a lot of Bible verses with me, and started messaging more about faith, and Skyping occasionally, and Skyping a lot more about, and just getting to know each other. And in the midst of all that, my faith continued to grow with the church I was attending at, and it continued to grow between the two of us with the things we were sharing as we were going through our individual struggles. So eventually I went out to South Africa to meet her in person. And yeah, since we'd kind of gotten to know each other remotely, we just kind of knew that it was meant to be. And we just have managed to forge this three-stranded rope, and I'll credit Carol with that term, of the two of us with God in the middle. And it's an amazingly strong rope.
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit about the differences that has made in your life?
Yeah. One of the things we vowed to do together was to definitely keep faith in the middle of our relationship, and to try to live a faith-based marriage, rather than just kind of doing what felt good and what was fun, and to just keep the focus on how Jesus wanted us to live, and have biblical values first and foremost in our marriage, and in our daily lives. So we vowed to do maintenance throughout the marriage, active maintenance, to just stay focused on having Jesus in our lives, and have that guide us every day, together and separately, as we do as we are in our work environments. And that has made a huge, huge difference. In concert with that, having a strong church family has been absolutely critical, and a big source of our strength and our happiness. Both at our previous church and where we are now, we just have had amazing home groups, life groups, I did not have a biblical or a faith-based circle of friends ever in my life. And as we know now, or as I've come to learn, that is absolutely key to having a strong relationship with God, is to surround yourselves with people who know Him like you do. And then to feed off each other when someone's having a difficult time, and to know that they are there to offer you godly advice, and to be there alongside you when we go through our inevitable storms in life.
What kind of advice would you give to someone that was in your shoes, like you were saying, that, knew that God was there but didn't really have that faith? What would you what would be some advice you'd give to them?
For sure, I would say that you want to have a fireproof house. You don't want to have to run out and grab the fire hose 3 blocks away when your house is on fire. You want to have your house be safe. So the comparison there is just having God and having biblical values in your life every day, rather than going with the flow and letting the world guide you, especially nowadays with the social media and all the influences in the world that pull people in a variety of directions, most of them bad. You want to have that fireproofing in your house all the time. And you get that by living your life with the faith-based, in a faith-based manner with values that come out of the Bible.
Yeah, I think the other question I kind of had was like, that I like to ask people is, how can someone share their faith in the military for someone that was in a position similar to you? What does that look like in like a practical way?
Yeah, and as I've said earlier, I've always been a Christian, but during my time in the military, I was really not a practicing and a demonstrative Christian. As I grew, I know I'm doing a better job of it now at Delta in my flying world, but when I was in the military, I really didn't do very much of it, and I didn't see very much of it either. I'm not quite sure why that was. Obviously, there was the chapel on base, and drove by it all the time. But I don't know if you see much of it demonstrated now, or if maybe my world was just more task focused and focused on the mission.
I think that's a big thing. I think it's also where you're stationed too, because right now, kind of at Andrews as well. And it's very all about the mission and all that. But I think the cool thing is, I think that if you are a little bit bold and you kind of ask people like, hey, what do you believe in? Or, just kind of start like a gradual conversation about it. People are actually pretty open to talk about it, which was pretty cool. And this podcast too has kind of helped, kind of guide that conversation if they hear, I have a podcast, and, I've gotten to have some pretty cool conversations that I wouldn't have had without this being here. So yeah, I kind of see where you're getting at.
And part of that too is probably the fact that pilots have probably got a bit of a reputation of not being these touchy-feely, soft church-going, nice guys. You're a tough business pilot, and you focus on the mission, and so there was probably some of that. And certainly at Andrews, it was very mission focused, because if the mission failed, it was news. Everything got on the news at the 89th. I remember having a meeting with the Chief of Staff of the Air Force one time, and he said he has 2 no-fail missions. One of them is the Thunderbirds, and one of them is the 89th, because if things go badly, it has a lasting impact. If a plane crashes or you have a boat crash, and it's just a regular plane, but if it's a VIP plane or if it's the Thunderbirds, that's on the news for a lot longer, and that represents the image of the Air Force. And it can certainly have big government impacts, national impacts as well.
Yeah, I don't think people realize, you see maybe a 10-second clip on CNN, and then, but they don't understand what goes into that. The dog sweeps, you have to do all the stuff that goes into it, and people don't really see that.
Yeah, so probably back when I was in the military, people just kind of did their own faith, but I don't really remember there being a need to share, or very often to have somebody who's having a hard time to comfort them. maybe it is because it was just a very high-performing world. And we had, for the most part, really sharp people who just got the job done and pressed forward and made things happen. There were a few times when, as a leader, as an aircraft commander, as an instructor, I had to find a people hat and take my mission hat off and put it on. I was much more of a mission hat wearer than a people hat wearer. Mm-hmm. So, and then there was a stigma, I think, of, is it appropriate to push your faith onto people? The Air Force became more and more of a social petri dish during my time in the military, where social issues were kind of, especially under some administrations, were pushed onto the military. And I'm sure you saw that as well. So being bold and open about your faith is probably a perception that that kind of thing could get you spoken to, that, you shouldn't be forcing that on people. Which is kind of crazy when you think about, go back in history and how prominent chaplains were on the battlefield and taking care of people's spiritual needs. It was just too businesslike to have room for that. But learned that there's always room for that. Always.
Definitely. So can you talk about just your transition out of the Air Force?
Yeah, so it was a busy year when I retired, got married, and started at Delta. And in 2014, Carol came over, immigrated legally to America from South Africa. And she went through the whole citizenship path eventually and is now as patriotic of an American as you will ever find. And since we went through the immigration process legally, we do have a strong opinion on that as well. So it was a difficult time as well, starting over my second career, because I was a newlywed with two teenage stepkids. My own two kids, who were also teenagers at the time. One was in college already. I was starting a new job with Delta, doing very different flying, a very different job than I had done in the Air Force. And I had my new wife, who had left a very different culture to come and be with me in America. And she says, immigration is not for sissies. It's really hard to immerse yourself in a very different culture and uproot from where you were and start over in a completely different environment. Easier now than it no doubt was for people like my mother, who had to rely on writing letters, which went by ship or maybe by plane. Now you've got the internet and you can pick up your phone and FaceTime with somebody on the other side of the world just with a couple pushes. So that was a tough year with us having to start this new life together. The biggest blessing, no doubt, was finding a church and getting into a good church family, which when I was out of town, then those were people that Carol could call on if she ever needed help from anybody. So a lot of adjustments, a lot of growth. And one of the things that we have stuck to and still do is our maintenance, ongoing maintenance. We do reading plans together continually. We mix in a YouVersion marriage relationship plan every few months.
That's cool.
To just keep touching on the things that are important in a biblical marriage and a biblical relationship. Because we all get pulled by the world nowadays in little ways here and there. Carol has a pretty high power, stressful job as well. So, and my job can be busy with commuting up to New York to work. So we, as with everybody, we do feel the stress of the world at times. But staying grounded in our faith and in the Bible. And I really do try to protect our Saturdays. That's our kind of personal Sabbath, to put a fence up around ourselves and just be with each other and stay close to each other and not get caught up in all the happenings around us. Granted, it is easier that we don't have 3 or 4 kids to take in 3 or 4 different directions to sporting events, that we can just be with each other and play tennis or go on an outing together, do something.
And how has that helped your relationship, just setting that time aside, especially with your busy schedules?
Well, putting the other person first in your relationship. Jesus put us first by giving his life for us. So we devoting that time to each other really helps us to keep the relationship strong, in that there's never any doubt that in Carol's mind that I think she comes first, and I feel the same, that she thinks I come first, which is just a very special tonic that I think everyone should have in their marriage. And having that fence to protect our time is pretty sacred for us. And we are very reluctant to allow things to intrude into that, especially now that I'm back to flying.
So what advice would you give to people that are still serving?
If I could go back knowing what I know now, and I do have to say that in the last year, since the last election for sure, I feel there has been a remarkable change in the mentality in America as far as being bold about classical social issues. Obviously, that whole realm got a massive boost with the Charlie Kirk assassination. And there's no doubt now that there is room and it is acceptable to be bold about your faith and to speak about it unashamedly, which is, I think, the greatest legacy that Charlie Kirk has left behind. That being said, work environments, the military environment, there are certain restrictions and, I don't know, appropriate levels of behavior that are expected in certain ways. And it would no doubt be frowned upon, and not necessarily effective either, to be running around screaming, "You're all going to die if you don't go to church."
Yeah.
But certainly when coming across people who are struggling, to come alongside them and share stories of how you were once struggling and what you did, or tell someone, I was in a situation one time where I was really struggling and I got out of it and I got a lot of help from a church group. Do you go to church? Is there a church nearby that you could go to? Telling your story for them to think, that kind of makes sense. I should look into that. And then praying with people like that. I did the evangelism course at Life a few months ago, which I thought was excellent. And there certainly is room in today's military to go alongside people who are struggling, because the military for sure is full of a lot of struggling people. Even though the deployment rates have come down from what they used to be. But certainly for people of faith to, in a wise manner and in a thought-out manner, be bold about coming alongside people and letting them come to understand the benefits of living a faith-based life that leads to salvation by accepting Jesus as your Savior. There's certainly a lot of opportunities for that. In my current job at Delta, I've been with Delta for 11 years almost now. I was a first officer until very recently by choice, because I'd felt like I'd done all that be the boss, be the captain stuff, and I'd flown around the world 5 times in a row at one stage. So I don't do time zones. I was happy just being the guy in the right seat that turns to the captain and says, well, let me know how this works out. I'll be here waiting for you when you get done dealing with whatever issue. And I was able to control my schedule so that I could be home every weekend, because I was in my previous church's leadership as well. And prioritizing teaching middle school with Carol, middle school kids at our previous church. So I could control my schedule that way, which was very important. And control my lifestyle. But then in 2013, I had or 2023, I should say, had a very near-death experience. By the grace of God, we had switched from AARP, which is kind of leftist in their mindset, to AMAC, the Association for Mature American Conservatives. And we got a flyer from them in the mail with advertising this Lifeline screening, which is an ultrasound to check typical problem areas in your body. So Carol and I said, well, we should go check that out. So it was at our own cost. We went and got these scans. Long story short, followed mine up eventually with a CT scan, and took the CT scan to a vascular surgeon. We actually knew that there was an issue based on the initial test results on the CT scan. So we called a friend and asked her, she works up in Annapolis, who's the best vascular surgeon you know from the hospital up there. So she gave us a name, called his office, and I got an appointment in 5 days, which we were astonished that we could do that.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
It does not happen unless there's help. So I go into this appointment. He takes a look at my carotid artery, and he walks in and he says, what are you doing next week? Because you're about to have a stroke. Your carotid artery is 90% blocked. And I had no idea. I had no symptoms. I was in probably better shape than I had been in the Air Force, because the Air Force standards were very poor. So a week later, I had an endarterectomy, which is basically cutting open the neck, taking out the artery, cutting it open, cleaning it up, and putting it all back together.
It's incredible they can do that.
Amazing. I'm glad there are people like that can focus.
Right.
And that can tolerate blood and all that stuff, because I couldn't do that. But yeah, so I had this, again, life-saving surgery. My first symptoms would have been a potentially fatal stroke, or worse, leaving me in a very downgraded state for the rest of my life. But certainly a God incidence that it was discovered when it was discovered.
How did you feel when you got that diagnosis?
That was probably the toughest week of my life, that I could identify any certain stretch of time, because it's not like you're going for knee surgery where they say, well, there's a risk of losing your toenails and having a stroke and having a heart attack and whatever. They were actually going to mess with the thing that would potentially give me a stroke. And a very real risk of complications. So I don't know how many people have actually sat down with their spouse and their kids and talked about if I don't come out of this, which is what Carol and I actually did, and going through life insurance policies and making sure that all the finances were kind of cleaned up, and that if she needed to take over, that she knew how to do it. And we, the practical stuff that you just don't think about having to deal with. So that was a rough week.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah. But again, probably the second time in my life coming out of that surgery and waking up and having this team of people around me checking my neurological functions to make sure that I had not had a stroke.
Right.
During the surgery, because the only indications would have been after waking up that something didn't work. But praise to God, everything went mostly well. Had a little vocal cord issue, which I eventually got over. But yeah, that was a tough week, and certainly coming out of that, oddly has been an amazing evangelism tool for me, because I've been able to tell this story I don't know how many times, and most definitely woven into it in bright orange yarn is that this only happened with God's grace. At work, I wear a lanyard for the Delta Pilot Mutual Aid Association, which is our insurance, one of our medical insurance, income insurance programs. And I use that as a discussion starter with people. Say, why do you have the DPMA lanyard on? And I'll say, well, let me tell you a story. Yeah. So I've been able to tell the story to get them to go and get checked out, but also to let them know that this was all God's doing, that I'm able to tell the story.
And when you were going through that week of preparing all that, were you, asking God, why is this happening to me? Or were you at a point in your faith where you were secure?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Quite a few people whose faith is not as developed as ours were saying things like, well, Al has done so much. God's not going to take him now. And we're just like, no, that's not how it works. We did have this level of peace that this is just part of God's plan. And if his plan is for me to not make it, that's the plan. It was, in a way, easier for me to say that than for Carol to say it, because she would have been the one left behind if I hadn't made it. But yeah, so that was it was strange. It was a strange emotion that, again, I wasn't fearful at all. I just trusted that, well, this is happening for a reason. There have been numerous things in the last 10, 15 years where at the time Carol and I were scratching our heads like, why is this going on? What is this all about? And then 6 months later, we're like, well, I guess that was part of the plan.
Man, that's got to give you peace too.
Yeah, it is. It is a strange feeling that I don't think a lot of people go through. But it certainly does test your faith, because at no point was I afraid, because what am I going to be afraid of? That I wouldn't wake up. Well, then I don't wake up. So what's there to be afraid of? I wouldn't have any pain. I was somewhat concerned that if I did have a stroke, boy, life's going to get complicated. But again, there'd been enough things that happened in our life, not to mention how Carol and I just ended up back together, that we're like, well, it's the plan. We don't know it, so we'll do what we can to prepare, which is something it's part of my wiring, is to prepare and, that whole Boy Scout thing, just try to do what you can to set it up, but ultimately it's out of our hands.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that. And yeah, that piece that you talk about, just something that, I know you do, but I mean, that's what I'd long for, just for people to know that, because it really is nothing that you can really, explain. But yeah.
Yeah, it is. I'm a walking, talking testament to the plan and not knowing the plan. But we do have a finite time on this earth, and we have a job to do. And it took me a while to figure out what my job was, my real job was, and what the real balance should be. I certainly didn't have it in the Air Force, where it was all just mission and getting the job done. But perspective has changed.
I know that you did tell some pretty cool stories, but looking back, is there just one moment that really sticks out to you from your career?
No, not one. Too many absolutely crazy stories to tell. With all the traveling we did, some pretty hilarious moments, dealing with Secretary of State, Vice President, Secretary of Defense, travel and changes to their itinerary, and explaining to them how they need to do their travel so that success is guaranteed. Just so many stories about things that happened and that we had to deal with itinerary changes. One of the stories, which one should I tell? I'll tell my Southern Illinois story. So we were on a Secretary of State trip with Hillary Clinton, bebopping through Africa. And again, this could be like a 2-hour story, but during our trip in Africa, the president of Ghana died. So eventually the Clinton State Department accepted that she would have to go to the funeral in Accra in Ghana. And we had a stop planned in Togo, which is right next doors. So the schedule went through all kinds of iterations. We went into Ghana, spent the night, and then we were very late leaving the next day to go to Togo. And then from Togo, we had to go up to Turkey in the middle of the night. And we end up flying into Togo, and she goes off and does her thing. And we had done all the coordination with the local people for servicing for the plane, for gas, and to service the lavatories and get the stairs and all that stuff. And the embassy in Ghana were the ones who sort of controlled everything. So I'm running around as the captain there, trying to get everything sorted out. And I'm outside, and the fuel truck pulls up. And this guy gets out, and he asks me for the approval form. I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, I need the fuel credit card approval form. And we took great pride in making sure all of our I's were dotted and T's were crossed with our planning, because if we didn't, we could get stuck. So I knew that, okay, there's something broken here. We do not know what this form is. Now it's middle of the night in Ghana or in Togo. There's nobody back home that can help us because it's middle of the night in DC. And this guy will just not connect the gas truck up to the plane to give us gas without this form. So doing some discussions with the embassy folks there, they say, well, it's written in the foreign clearance guide that you have to do that form. I go, show me. So he pulls out the Ghana foreign clearance guide, and I go, but we're in Togo. He goes, but yes, but we're responsible for Togo. So, well, then it should be your job to put it in Togo's form.
Yeah.
Togo's chapter as well. So how are we going to, we need to make something happen here because the secretary is going to be back in an hour and we need gas. Okay. So he's like, I don't know. So he goes, well, maybe we can try a different gas vendor on the field. So call up another gas truck, different vendor shows up, asks for the form. So I'm like, oh boy. And there were days when we used to carry cash. We'd leave the US with $200,000 in cash to pay for all of our stuff in cash. I think they did away with that because of fraud. So, which reminds me of another story. That's a good one. I'll tell that one too.
Yeah.
And so while I'm talking with the second gas truck guy, a little truck pulls up and an older gentleman gets out and he's got a walkie-talkie. So I'm like, okay, this guy's somebody because he's got his own truck and he's got a walkie-talkie. So this guy comes walking over to me and he says, so I understand there's a problem with the fuel. So I kind of explained to him what's going on, that we didn't know and it wasn't written up. And he goes, He says, many years ago, I went to university in America. So I go, oh, really? Where did you go? He says, I went to Southern Illinois University. So I said, in Carbondale or Edwardsville? He says, oh, Carbondale. So I go, you're a Saluki? I went to SIU. And his eyes opened up and he's like, you went to Carbondale? I said, yes. I said, where did you live? And he mentioned his dormitory. And I said, oh, I lived in this place. And so we have this chat about Southern Illinois University. Yeah. And he says, I get you gas. And he takes his walkie-talkie and he screams at somebody in the walkie-talkie. And he says, no problem.
That's so cool.
And this other gas truck pulls up. The guy connects it and he starts pumping. And I'm like, whew. And the other guys on the crew are just looking at me like, how do you do this? So we get our gas and the guy comes to me and he says, do you have the paper? I said, no, but the embassy guy does. He's over there. I have to go. So I pointed him to the embassy guy and we left. And we got our gas. Clinton came and we flew and all was well. So what are the odds of meeting an airfield manager type in Togo who went to the same college I did?
So I know you mentioned you possibly could write a book, but can you just kind of explain how scripture can be so beneficial as a pilot?
Yeah, so from my perspective, as I said earlier, there's in my daily life in the past, I was kind of guided by just a set of morals rather than by scripture. But as I started developing, came across these scripture passages that were like, oh, well, that applies exactly to this scenario, to dealing with these kind of people. So there are some verses that a few years ago, a friend of mine asked me to do a presentation at his church about the pilot's life as a Christian and to tell some of my stories. So I did a little bit of that. But I did make note of some verses that pertain to the field as I observe it. First and foremost, about us all knowing our place in this world and about being evangelists. And for us to be thankful for who we are and to be, to show humility and be thankful for our talents and the gifts we have. Romans 1:16, for I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. So the gospel does need to be in us all the time. Philippians 2 verse 3, don't be selfish, don't try to impress others, be humble, thinking of others as better than ourselves. The pilot world is known to have a few egos in it. And I've Carol always gives me a hard time when we meet new people and we start chatting about, what did we used to do? Oh, you were in the Air Force. Where did you fly? And I'll say, I flew at Andrews. And she's like, he never tells people that he flew the vice president for 14 years, and, that sort of thing. So that's just not me. I've just always, until you making me talk about this stuff, really haven't advertised what I used to do. It's not something I bring up right away. Probably my favorite passage, which I've lived by from a work and an achievement and a doing perspective, is Colossians 3:23. Do everything as if you were doing it for God, not for men. That certainly was my mantra with doing things at Andrews, as always, as best we could. I tell people that we used to have a plus or minus 10-second arrival target. So we would try to plan our arrival at wherever we were going, plus or minus 10 seconds. And if you were able to stop in the parking spot that we were expecting to park in, plus or minus 10 seconds, we did our job to get there on time. So that's working as if it's for God, because I think God would be happy with plus or minus 10 seconds.
Right, because you might have a situation where someone really doesn't deserve it, but, you lean on that scripture, and you're like, and people kind of ask, like, well, why? They don't deserve that. Why are you,
Absolutely. It doesn't matter who you're flying for. You're doing your job with your talents as best you can because God gave you those talents.
Right, yeah.
So Colossians 3:23 is very near and dear to my heart. Difficult people. A few difficult people in my travels.
Yeah, I've never dealt with anybody difficult before.
No, never. So showing grace and love, obviously, boy, is there ever a need for that?
Yeah.
And especially today. So Matthew 6:14-15, if you forgive those who sin against you, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you refuse to forgive others, your Father will not forgive your sins. Boy, that's something to live by nowadays, especially. Dealing with very difficult aids, VIPs aids. There's been some classic people I've dealt with in my life. I won't go into details, but not only from a professional perspective did we have to just breathe deep and take whatever verbal beating and assault we were getting, but you had to just somehow shrug it off and move on. And I am cursed in that I have a face which kind of shows what I'm thinking in some cases. So I've really had to watch that in those scenarios. But being able to forgive is fundamental. Because gosh, without it, where would we be? And then, of course, again, with love and patience, dealing with difficult people, 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4-7. That's the love is patient and kind, love is not jealous or boastful, etc. It is not irritable. Working with a 24-hour duty day, and when you've been awake for 22 or 23 hours and you get an issue that pops up, whatever it is, it's very easy to just fly off the handle. And so just taking that breath and thinking, okay, I got to take this in stride. I got to be a good person, not be irritable. It helps to have that guidance there. And then, the big one really nowadays, especially, and certainly back then too, with all the things in the world that pull people, is the whole Ephesians 6:13 with the whole God's armor ensemble. In the military, certainly, and it's hard to think where it's not a factor today, where there's not the world pulling at you, and you need to have God's armor on you to protect you from the influences in the world, materialism, greed, vitriol, unkind speech, It's just everywhere today, and it's become such a pervasive part of society and accepted in so many ways. And it certainly gets directed at people of faith, and to be able to just maintain composure and not let your morals, your biblical morals, your faith-based morals fall by the wayside with the need to respond is a challenge. And certainly having God's arm on helps every day with that. Yeah, and then I kind of alluded to this earlier, where we mentioned what would I have to say to young people and people in today's military and in life, really. How should I share my faith, and what should I say, and what can I say, and do I feel comfortable saying things or not? 1 Timothy 4 verse 12, don't let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for the believers in speech and conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. So we're all young. We're not fully grown. We will never be fully grown. So saying, well, I'm too young to say anything. No, you're not. You are grown beyond some people that you may be talking to. And, you can be a leader to the younger people than you out there. People younger in faith, people younger in morals and life experiences. And sharing that stuff with them, with your faith foundation, is the way to lead people to salvation.
Yeah. And I'd love, those are good verses. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
The last question, the most important question I can ask you is, why should someone follow Jesus?
Yeah, well, the consequences are pretty harsh if you don't. And what can be more desirable than to have eternal life in heaven? As I said, the consequence, pretty unappealing if you don't. And then along with that, if I look back at the struggles, how desperate I felt before I really had faith, before I really was following Jesus, and before I'd accepted him fully in a practical sense, I went from just this dread in life about so many things to effectively having a hand grenade in my neck that was going to have surgery, and having this peace that, this is God's plan, and I'm not afraid of this because I have the peace that being saved and knowing Jesus gives me. And everybody can have that if they seek it, because can't quote the verse, but Jesus is out there knocking on our door, wanting to come in and eat with us. And it's not hard to open the door and let him into our hearts and share that meal with him.
Love that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Praise God. Well, yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been a delight to have you on and hear your story.
Good stuff to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. So
yeah.
I just
Stay
really
tuned for the book someday.
Yeah, definitely. I got to hear about this fraud story though.
Oh, so my fraud story. This was in Nigeria. We flew into Abuja, and we had about a 2 or 3 day sit there. And one of the things we always needed for the plane was a stair truck for the Ravens, the security guys, to sit out at the plane, because they stayed at the plane 24/7, to just keep anybody from messing with it. And so we had to have a stair truck for them to be able to get in the plane to use the bathroom. And we'd call ahead and we'd set up all the servicing equipment ahead of time. So we get to Abuja in Nigeria, and I'm putting the plane to bed with the crew and the maintenance guys and the local airport equipment guys there. So I say to him, we're going to keep the stair truck, right? He says, yes. He says, it'll be $300. I go, okay. He says, an hour. and this is cash. So I said, yeah, that's not going to work. What about that maintenance stand over there? He goes, yeah, you can use that. Same price. So now I'm like, $300 times 24 hours times 3 days. Wow, that's ridiculous. No way. So I pull the embassy guy aside who had been coordinating with him. And I said, okay, do me a favor, go get me his business card and bring it back to me. So he goes and talks to the guy hands him his business card. He comes to me and I take the card and I say, okay, now you go tell him all of our other stops in Africa, we've been averaging about $8,000, $9,000, whatever it was, for all of our support equipment in cash. So we'll give him, since we're here for 3 days, we'll give him, whatever, $9,000 for everything, like we had in all the other stations. And then you tell him that when his president comes to America, to Washington, he lands at our airfield, at Andrews. And all they pay for is fuel. We give them all the support equipment at free of charge. They only pay for fuel. So if he won't take what we're offering, we'll give him whatever he's asking. But then the next time his president comes to America, we're going to get our money back from them. Yeah. And if they say, why is it so expensive this time? We're going to give them his business card. Yeah. So he goes, okay. So he walks over to the guy. He's talking to him. And the guy just raises his arms and turns around and walks away. And the embassy guy turns to me and goes, so we had a deal. So I felt like I saved the U.S. taxpayers a lot of money that day.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of Faith in the Line of Duty. If you're a first responder or in the military and have a story you'd like to share, email me at faithinthelineofduty@gmail.com. You could be a guest on a future episode. To continue the conversation, visit my Facebook and Instagram page. Thanks again for tuning in, and join me next time for another encouraging story of faith in the line of duty.